Don't go back in there. He's not worth dying for. Nobody is. The scream hit Emily from behind. She didn't stop. Every person on that property was running away from the fire. Security guards, housekeepers, drivers, all of them pouring out into the morning air, while the mansion collapsed into itself in waves of heat and black smoke. Emily Dawson turned around and ran straight back in. Not because Nathan Cole deserved to live. She wasn't certain he did. But she had spent 12 years hunting the truth about her father's disappearance, and the only man alive who held that truth was still inside. She was not leaving without him. Subscribe right now, hit that bell. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. You're the new maid, aren't you? The first time Nathan Cole spoke directly to Emily, she was carrying a breakfast tray down the east corridor, and he was walking past her without slowing, without looking, speaking the words the way someone says, "Close the window." Functional, impersonal, aimed at no one in particular. "Yes, sir," Emily said to his back. He was already gone. She stood there holding the tray perfectly steady, face perfectly still, and watched him disappear around the corner. Then she continued walking. Inside her chest, something cold and precise clicked into place like a key turning in a lock she'd been building for 4 years. 11 more days, she told herself. Just 11 more days. Emily Dawson had been invisible her entire adult life. Not because the world had made her that way, though it had tried. She had chosen it. Invisibility was a tool, and she had sharpened it the way other people sharpen ambition or anger. She had learned to walk into a room and leave no trace of herself in anyone's memory. She had learned to listen without appearing to listen, to watch without appearing to watch, to understand conversations she was never part of simply by paying attention to the quality of the silence around them. She was 29 years old, and she had spent 4 of those years building the specific, intricate architecture of this moment. 8 months to arrange the right position at the right staffing agency. 3 months of being exactly the kind of employee that private household managers recommend without hesitation. Reliable, quiet, invisible, unremarkable, in every way that mattered to anyone who wasn't watching carefully. And then the assignment she had been engineered for without anyone knowing it had been engineered at all. Nathan Cole's household, 30,000 square feet, 16 staff, 1 man at the center of everything. The same man whose signature she had found on a contract dated 14 years ago, 4 days before her father walked out of their house and never came back. Emily had not gone to the police. She had tried that. Twice. 7 years ago and again 3 years after that, with more documentation the second time, more specificity, more of the quiet desperation of someone who has been hitting the same wall long enough to understand exactly where the weak points are. Both times the doors closed. Both times she was told with increasing impatience that Marcus Dawson's disappearance was a tragedy, not a crime, and that she should find a way to move forward with her life. She had smiled at the officers and thanked them and walked out both times. And then she had built a different kind of case, the kind that didn't require anyone else to believe her, never, the kind that walked through the front door and helped itself. She was here. She had access. She just needed time. What she had not planned for was the fire. It started at 6:47 on a Thursday morning, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a sound. A low structural groan that traveled through the bones of the building like a warning before the body understands the danger. Emily stopped in the east corridor, tilted her head, smelled it, smoke. She moved toward the utility corridor, and the world tore itself open. The blast rolled up from the basement like a physical wave, and the floor didn't shake. It lurched a sudden sideways violence that threw a painting off the wall 6 feet ahead of her and blew the corridor door off its hinges. Through that open gap came heat so dense and immediate, it felt like running into a wall. Emily stumbled backward 2 steps. "Get out," her brain said. Flat, certain, non-negotiable. She ran. Down the main corridor past Mrs. Crane, pressed against the wall with a phone at her ear, and a face the color of chalk, past 2 security guards who were already through the front entrance and accelerating past every reasonable instinct she had ever developed in 29 years of living. The front doors were open. Morning air hit her clean and cool and safe, and she felt the particular physical relief of someone who has just made it by inches. She stopped, turned around, because she had not seen Nathan Cole. Not in the corridor, not at the doors, not in the massive staff and security pouring out of every exit. In 31 days, she had memorized this house the way a surgeon memorizes anatomy, every room, every door, every habit, every pattern. And Nathan Cole's pattern, without exception, every morning at 6:45 was to be in his study, which was in the East Wing, which was where the fire was burning. Emily, don't you dare. Mrs. Crane caught her arm with both hands, the grip of someone who has made a definitive decision. The older woman's voice was fracturing at the edges, fear overriding 62 years of professional composure. Is he out? Emily's voice was flat. Did anyone confirm he's out? Mrs. Crane's face collapsed. Emily pulled her arm free. Emily. She was already through the doors. She would never be able to explain it cleanly. Not as bravery was a decision made with full awareness, and she was operating somewhere below conscious decision-making in the older, rawer part of the brain that runs on refusal. She refused to let this end wrong. Not because she cared whether Nathan Cole lived or died, she genuinely was not sure in that moment what she felt about that. But he was the only door to the truth about her father, and she had spent 4 years walking to this door, and she was not going to watch it burn. The smoke had organized itself into a low rolling ceiling that pressed down toward the floor. She dropped below it, covered her mouth, and moved through the house on pure memory. Left at the second junction, right at the third, past the library, past the guest suite, toward the study. Her eyes were streaming. Her lungs were starting to register a specific, frightening heat. She found him 20 feet short of the study door. Nathan Cole was on the floor. One hand flat, one hand braced against the wall, trying to push himself upright and failing. Blood along his left temple, dark and real. His suit jacket torn at the shoulder. One leg refusing to cooperate. He was conscious, but only just, and when he looked up at the sound of her footsteps, his expression moved through confusion, recognition, and something that in another context might have been relief. "The maid," he said, voice scraped raw. "Can you stand?" "My knee, something's..." He tried, it buckled. "Arm over my shoulder, right now." He stared at her for a half second too long. This man for whom no one had ever used that tone, and Emily said his name sharp, and he moved. They moved together through the house, his weight heavy across her shoulders, Emily navigating from memory, while her lungs burned and her vision blurred from smoke. Twice the fire cut the path she'd planned, and she pivoted, without stopping, pulling them through doors she'd cataloged on her second day here and never expected to need. When they hit the side exit and the door flew open and the air came in, Nathan Cole's legs gave out completely, and they both went down onto the concrete outside, and Emily coughed for 30 seconds so hard she couldn't see. The firefighters reached them 40 seconds later. She sat on the back of an ambulance with an oxygen mask loose in her hands and watched the mansion burn, and Mrs. Crane sat next to her, not speaking, and Nathan was loaded into a separate unit and taken away, and the morning organized itself around the fact of what had just happened. By noon, her name was on every local channel. Maid risked life to rescue billionaire Nathan Cole from burning mansion. She watched it from a hospital waiting room, lungs clear, burns minor, and felt something sitting in her chest that she didn't have a word for. The discomfort of a person whose carefully constructed invisibility has just been detonated on live television. She had needed to be invisible. She was no longer invisible. "Ms. Dawson." A man in a dark suit filled the doorway. 40s, broad shoulders, the watchful economy of movement that came from years managing powerful people's problems. "Daniel Marsh, Mr. Cole's chief of staff. He's asking to see you." Nathan Cole looked smaller in a hospital bed. The mansion, the suits, the architecture of authority stripped away. He was just a man with a bandaged head and cracked ribs, watching her with eyes that were trying to solve something. "Sit down," he said. She sat. A silence. "Why did you come back?" he said. Quiet, real. The question of a man who has genuinely turned something over and cannot land. She had prepared for this. Instinct. "I couldn't leave someone behind." Clean, believable, and completely safe. She'd rehearsed it 6 times in the ambulance. But Nathan Cole was watching her with something close to honest, and the prepared answer felt like paper in her mouth. "I'm not entirely sure," she said instead. It was the first true thing she had said to him since the day she was hired. He made a small, rough sound that might have been a laugh. It hurt his ribs. He stopped. "My head of security ran 12 years. He ran. People run from fires, Emily said. You didn't. She looked at her hands and said nothing. You're staying on, he said. I'm dissolving the security contract, keeping a small core staff while everything's reviewed, people I can account for. His eyes were direct. I want you to stay. The careful architecture of Emily's plan shifted on its foundation. This was not in the plan, none of it. The fire, the rescue, this conversation, this man looking at her like she was actually completely present in the room. She thought about her father. She thought about the 4 years it had taken to get here. Okay, she said. The next 2 weeks unsettled her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Nathan didn't snap back to his previous self. Something had shifted, small things, but Emily noticed everything. He said good morning and meant it. He looked up when she brought his coffee. He asked her opinions on small things and listened to the answers. She kept her distance. She reminded herself every single day of why she was there, but it was getting harder. Then on a Tuesday evening, she was finishing in the kitchen of the rented house Nathan had moved into while the mansion remained under investigation, and she heard him through the thin wall, and his voice was doing something she hadn't heard from him before, controlled on the surface. But underneath that surface, afraid. I told you to handle it, he said. A pause. Then handle it differently. I don't care what it costs. If that information surfaces before I've had time to contain it, everything falls apart. Emily stood completely still, dish towel in her hands. No, nobody finds out about Dawson. Not yet. You understand me, nobody. The floor dropped out from under her. Dawson. Her name, her father's name. She stood there breathing, counting, building the mask back, piece by piece. When Nathan walked in 2 minutes later, she was exactly where she'd been. Face neutral, hands steady, eyes clear. Need anything? He said. Just finishing up, she said. He nodded and poured a glass of water. She watched him, this man who had just said her father's name in the same breath as contains and nobody finds out, and felt 12 years of suspicion solidify into something cold and sharp and certain. Good night, Mr. Cole, she said, and smiled at him on the way out, because now she knew 2 things she hadn't known that morning. He wasn't just connected to her father's disappearance. He knew she was here. He had known, and he had said nothing, which meant one of them was being played. And Emily Dawson had spent 12 years making sure it was never her. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark running the same information through every possible configuration until 5 in the morning, when she accepted that there were only 3 viable interpretations of what she'd heard, and none of them were good. Either Nathan had known who she was from the beginning and had hired her deliberately, a counterplay she hadn't anticipated, or he'd found out after the fire, when her name went public, and was deciding what to do. Or someone else had told him, which meant a third party was watching both of them. The not yet was the thing she kept returning to. Not the language of someone trying to bury a problem. The language of someone managing a timeline. Nathan Cole had a plan that involved her. She had no idea what it was, and she was running out of time to find out before it arrived. By 5:30, she had made 3 decisions. She would not run. Running meant losing every day of access she'd earned. She would accelerate whatever she'd been doing carefully. She needed to do faster. And she would give nothing away. Not a look, not a word, not a single unguarded second. She went downstairs and made coffee like it was any other morning. Nathan came down at 7, looking like he hadn't slept either. He stopped when he saw her. Half a second, the kind of pause a person makes when they've been rehearsing something and the reality lands differently than the rehearsal. Then he moved to the table and said morning, in a voice that was entirely ordinary. Morning, Emily said, and set his coffee down with a steady hand. He opened his phone. She moved through her routine. The silence between them was exactly the same as every morning for 2 weeks, and that exact sameness was the most frightening thing that had happened since the fire, because it meant he was good at this too. Meetings downtown this afternoon, he said without looking up. I need the Hargrove file from the secondary office before noon, and cancel the 3 o'clock with Lindemann. I'll take care of it. He looked up, the direct measuring look she had learned to return with absolute blankness. You look tired, he said. I slept fine, she said. 2 seconds of eye contact. Then he looked back at his phone. Good, he said. She turned to the counter and breathed through the hammering in her chest. Round 1, neither of them had shown anything. but they both knew something had shifted. She was certain of it. She called Carol from the car on the way to the secondary office, voice low, one eye on the rearview mirror, out of habit that had become reflex. "He knows," she said the moment Carol picked up. "How sure are you?" "Certain. He's known since the fire, since my name was everywhere." She laid out the phone call, the words exactly the "not yet" that had kept her awake, the specific quality of Nathan's voice when he said her father's name like a liability. Carol was quiet in that particular way that meant she was building something. "He could be protecting you," she said carefully, "or positioning himself. Or both. Either way, I need something concrete. Not a name on a phone call I can't prove I heard. Something I can actually use." "How long do you think you have?" Emily looked at the road. "I don't know, but I'm not waiting to find out." She parked, sat for a moment with the engine running, looked at her own eyes in the rearview mirror. "Carol, if I call and say I'm thinking of taking a few days off, that's the signal. Move everything immediately. Don't wait for me." A beat of silence. "Understood. Be careful, Emily." The secondary office was on the 11th floor, overflow operations during the mansion renovation, lighter staff, less visibility. Emily had been here twice. She knew the layout, knew the filing system, knew the assistant, Tim 26 Ernest, consistently underestimated by everyone in the building, which made him the most useful person here. She stopped at the cart downstairs, remembered Tim's order from her last visit. 2 sugars, no cream, set it on his desk without ceremony. Tim looked at the coffee like it was a small miracle. "You didn't have to. Nathan needs the Hargrove file before noon," she said, already moving. "And the Caldwell correspondence from Q3 archive. He wants a cross-reference run before the downtown meetings." She had invented the second request in the elevator, but she said it with the bored certainty of someone delivering a routine instruction, and Tim was already moving before she finished. The easiest lies were the ones that gave the other person something to do. Tim came back with 2 folders. She took the Hargrove file, tucked the Caldwell folder under her arm with the ease of someone handling routine paperwork, thanked him warmly, and left. In the elevator, she opened the Caldwell folder. 12 pages. 9 years of correspondence. 2 names she recognized from her own research, and one she didn't. Vincent Marsh. She read it twice. Checked the letterhead. Marsh Strategic Consulting. Marsh. Daniel Marsh. Nathan's chief of staff. The man who had walked into her hospital waiting room with that watchful, managed expression. The man who ran Nathan's entire world, every schedule, every visitor, every document that moved in and out of that operation. Vincent Marsh was listed as an intermediary, a routing point for payments moving from Caldwell's accounts through a holding company into a series of development contracts. The dates aligned perfectly with her father's audit, with the period when the money moved, when everything fell apart. Her father had audited those contracts. Daniel Marsh's name was on the money that moved through them. The elevator hit the lobby. Emily walked to the nearest chair with the deliberate calm of someone who has just been mildly surprised by the weather. Sat down, photographed every page of the Caldwell folder, checked the images twice, emailed them to the encrypted account, deleted the sent mail, stood up, went back upstairs, returned the folder to Tim with a thank you, and was in the car heading back before the full weight of it arrived. Daniel Marsh was not just Nathan's chief of staff. Daniel Marsh was connected to Caldwell, which meant connected to everything, the money, the cover-up, her father's disappearance. And he had been inside Nathan's operation for 15 years, which meant either Nathan knew exactly what Marsh was, and every cooperative gesture Nathan had made was a performance, or Nathan had no idea that the man managing his entire professional life was the same man who had helped Caldwell bury the evidence. Both were catastrophic, but in entirely different directions, and she needed to know which one was true before she moved an inch further. She spent the drive back laying it out methodically. If Marsh had identified her and told Nathan the not yet meant Nathan was waiting for Marsh's guidance on what to do with her, which meant she could be dangerous at any moment. If Marsh hadn't yet connected her name to the Caldwell situation, she had a window. Small, closing fast. She needed Marsh to talk before that window shut. She had one idea for how to make that happen. It was not a comfortable idea, but comfortable had stopped being relevant the day she walked back through a burning door. She found him at 7 that evening. Nathan was at a dinner that had extended per Marsh's text until at least 9. Marsh was in the side office, the small room he used when he needed to work outside Nathan's orbit. Door half open. Emily knocked once and pushed through without waiting. Marsh looked up. The expression was the one he always wore, with her careful, evaluating, professionally impenetrable. She had assumed it was simply the manner of someone who managed sensitive operations. Now she read it with new information, and it looked completely different. "Ms. Dawson," he said. Not surprised, never surprised. "I need to talk to you," she said, "off the record." "Off the record from whom?" "From Mr. Cole." A pause, his eyes going a careful degree, more careful. "That's an unusual request." "I know." She stepped in and closed the door. Stayed standing. She had made a deliberate decision about that height mattered not physically, but psychologically. She wanted to look at him directly, not up at him. "I want to talk about Robert Caldwell." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a very long time when you are watching someone decide whether to run or stay. Marsh stayed, but something shifted in his posture, the almost imperceptible stillness of someone who has been bracing for a specific moment for a long time and feels it arrive. "I'm not sure what you think you know," he said. Vincent Marsh, Marsh Strategic Consulting, 9 years of correspondence with Caldwell's holding company. Payment routing through the Eastfield development accounts. The same accounts my father audited the year before he disappeared. Silence. Marsh looked at the table. Not at the wall, not at her at the table, the way people look at something when they are having a private conversation with themselves about whether the thing they've been dreading is actually happening. "Your father," he said slowly. "Marcus Dawson," Malone said. His voice didn't shake. "Internal auditor. He found everything, and then he was gone." A long silence. Then Marsh looked up, and the expression on his face had changed in a way she hadn't expected. Not defensive, not calculating. Tired, old tired. The exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something for a very long time and feels the weight of it differently in this moment. "How long have you known about me?" he asked. "Since this afternoon." "And Nathan, he doesn't know about you yet." The yet landed exactly where she'd aimed it. Marsh looked at her steadily for a moment. "What do you want?" he asked. "The same thing my father wanted 14 years ago. The truth. On record. All of it, Caldwell, the accounts, the payments, what happened to my father. If I do that, if you do that, you go to the federal investigators as a cooperating witness, which changes your exposure significantly. You're not an attorney." "No, but I have one." He looked at her for a long moment, the precise calculation of a man selecting between two bad options. She had waited 4 years for this look from someone. "Caldwell threatened my family," Marsh said finally, very quiet. "My daughter was 8 years old." Emily said nothing. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I know what I did. I know what it cost." He looked at his hands. "I've known for years that this moment was coming. I just didn't know it would come through you." "Did you know who I was when Nathan hired me?" "No, I found out 2 days after the fire, when your name was on the news." "Yes." "You told Nathan?" "Jenny, what did he say?" A pause. Marsh seemed to consider something. Then he said, "I know. He already knew Ms. Dawson. He recognized your name the same night you appeared on the news. He hadn't told me because he was still figuring out how to handle it." "What was he going to do, Bikbama?" "He was going to tell you." Marsh met her eyes. "Those were his exact words to me. She deserves to hear it from me. Not from a file, not from news coverage, from me." That was 3 days ago. Emily stood very still. "He said that," she said. "Yes. Whatever version of Nathan Cole you built in your head to get yourself through this," Marsh said quietly. "I've worked alongside him for 15 years. And the man I've watched since that fire is not who he was before it." He paused. "I think you have noticed that too. I think it's the thing that's been keeping you awake." She looked at him for a long, careful moment, because he was right. And she hated that he was right. And she was absolutely not going to let it change anything until she had everything she needed. "I need your statement," she said. "Everything. Caldwell, the accounts, the payments, the timeline. 48 hours. 24, she said when he started to speak. He looked at her, nodded once. She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, did not turn around. "My father," she said. Do you know what actually happened to him? A long pause. No, Marsh said. Caldwell handled it himself. He never gave me details and His voice dropped. I didn't ask. That's what I'll carry for the rest of my life. Emily stood there for one full second. Then she walked out without a word. She made it to the end of the corridor before her legs decided they needed a moment. She stopped, pressed her back against the wall, placed both palms flat against it, and breathed 4 counts in 4 counts out the way she'd been breathing under impossible pressure since she was 17 years old and the first door was closed in her face. She deserves to hear it from me. She pushed off the wall. Her phone was already in her hand. She typed to Carol, one more piece just moved. Big one. Call me tonight late, put the phone away, went back to doing her job. Because that was what you did when it wasn't finished yet. You stayed in the room, you kept moving. You did not feel any of it until you were somewhere private and the work was done. The work was not done. But for the first time in 4 years of planning and 31 days of executing, Emily Dawson allowed herself to believe carefully, tentatively, with all the caution of someone who has been wrong before, that the truth was close enough to reach. What she was not allowing herself to think about was what it was going to cost her to hold it. She had been inside Nathan Cole's world for 31 days when the second explosion happened. And this one wasn't fire. It was a name. Tuesday morning, Marsh's office. Nathan still at the downtown meetings. Emily was in the corridor outside the main office when she heard Marsh's voice through the half-closed door, tighter than usual, the controlled urgency of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have. The Hargrove investigation is getting closer. He's pulled financials going back 15 years. Let him pull, Nathan said. Nothing connects directly. There's the Caldwell account. And if Hargrove finds Caldwell leads straight to, I said let him pull Daniel. A silence, then Marsh quieter, Nathan, if Marcus Dawson's name surfaces in a federal investigation, the whole structure, enough. One word, the kind that ends conversations permanently. Emily pressed her back against the wall. Her pulse was doing something she couldn't control. She had spent 4 years training herself to stay cold in these moments, surgical, operational, the emotions filed away for later, when there was somewhere safe to put them. She had imagined hearing her father's name in this context 100 times. In every version, she had imagined she was steady. She was not steady. She was standing in a corridor with her hand flat against a wall while someone talked about Marcus Dawson like a column in a spreadsheet that hadn't cleared, and something was being torn open in her chest with both hands. She moved away before either of them could come out. Turned the corner, stopped, pressed both palms against the wall, stood there for 10 full seconds breathing. Then she straightened, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, drank it at the counter and told herself very firmly that she was not going to cry in Nathan Cole's kitchen. Not today, not ever. She put the glass down, picked up her phone, sent Carol one line, I need to meet tonight. It's moving. They met at a diner 3 miles from the house. Carol was in the booth already, coffee reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the focused stillness she wore when something significant was happening. Tell me, Carol said before Emily sat down. Emily told her everything, the overheard conversation, the meeting downtown where her father had been named like a line item, the Marsh discovery, the Caldwell correspondence, the name Hargrove, all of it. Carol listened without interrupting, which meant she was taking it seriously. Carol interrupted everything always. Her silence was construction. When Emily finished, Carol looked at the ceiling for a moment. Caldwell, she said. You know it, Robert Caldwell, private equity, connected to 2 of the development contracts your father audited before he disappeared. She leaned forward. Emily, your father wasn't just a casualty. He found something. And Caldwell knew, and Nathan knew, and they buried it along with him. I know that. I need proof that moves. How close are you? Close enough that Nathan is scared. Carol studied her face for a moment with the particular attention of someone who has watched another person carry a very heavy thing for a very long time. And you, how are you holding up with all of this? I'm fine, Emily. I'm fine, Carol. He saved your life, Carol said quietly. Or you saved his, and now you're living in his house and don't. I'm asking if you're still seeing clearly. I see him perfectly clearly, Emily's voice went flat and certain. He is the reason I grew up without a father. He is the reason my mother worked herself hollow until she died at 61. He is the reason I have spent 12 years of my life chasing the truth. I see him very clearly. Carol nodded slowly. Okay. I need the physical files. There's a locked cabinet in the study of the main house. The investigation team releases the East Wing next week. Nathan goes back, I go with him. When he's occupied, I have a window. That's breaking and entering. I have legal access to the house. You know what I mean. Yes, Emily said. I know exactly what you mean. They sat with that. Be careful, Carol said. It wasn't professional advice. It was something older and more personal than that. Emily stood, pulled on her jacket. Carol, if something goes wrong, if this moves faster than I can manage, you have everything I've given you. Use it. Carol looked at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Nothing's going to go wrong, but if it does, Carol said quietly, I will burn his entire world down with what you've given me. Emily almost smiled. Good. She was back at the house by 9. Nathan was in the sitting room, bourbon untouched on the table, a folder open in his lap that he wasn't reading. He looked up when she came in, and something shifted in his expression, that subtle, involuntary change she had been noticing for days, the one she didn't know what to do with, the one that made her jaw tighten. He looked relieved. Long evening, he said. Errands, she said simply. He nodded, looked back at the folder. Then without looking up, I used to know someone named Dawson. Emily's entire body went still. She was near the doorway. Good. It gave her something to do with her hands. She rested one against the frame, casual, easy, and looked at him with the expression she had been building and reinforcing for 12 years. Mildly interested. No stake in what comes next. Oh, just that. Nathan closed the folder, turned it face down. A long time ago, before any of this, his voice was doing something deliberate, careful in a way that didn't match his usual economy. He was a good man. The past tense hit her like a physical thing. She absorbed it, showed nothing. What happened to him? She asked. Nathan picked up the bourbon, looked at it, set it back down. I made a mistake, he said, a significant one, and by the time I understood the full weight of it, it was too late to undo. That must be hard to live with, Emily said. The extraordinary thing, the thing she had not prepared for, that no amount of practice could have prepared her for, was that she meant it, not as a line, not as maintenance of cover. She looked at Nathan Cole sitting in that chair with 12 years of something terrible on his face, and she meant every single word. He looked at her. It is, he said quietly. Good night, mister. Cole, she said, and her voice only barely held. She lay awake until 3. There was a version of Nathan Cole she had constructed carefully over 12 years, assembled from anger and grief, and the specific fuel of a daughter who had nowhere else to direct her loss. Clean, simple, functional. Monster. Villain. The man who took her father and walked away clean and rich while she and her mother burned through everything trying to hold their lives together. That version had carried her through 4 years of planning and 31 days of execution. The man in the sitting room wasn't that version. I made a mistake, a significant one. She turned over in the dark. It didn't change anything. She was precise about that. Whatever Nathan felt about her father, guilt, grief, old remorse, it did not bring him back. It did not give her mother back the years she'd spent working herself to nothing. Guilt was not consequence. She needed the files, she needed the truth, and then she needed to decide what to do with it. She was still deciding which part of that sentence frightened her most when she fell asleep. The East Wing was released 4 days later. Nathan went back to the mansion on a Wednesday to review what had survived. Marsh, 2 security staff. Emily, she had positioned it carefully, insurance cataloging, volunteered before anyone else could. Marsh had looked at her with that evaluating expression. Nathan had said good, that helps, and moved on. The study was in the undamaged section. She had 40 minutes while Nathan and Marsh were on the other side of the house reviewing structural damage. 40 minutes in a set of lockpicks she'd been carrying at the bottom of her bag for 3 weeks. She was inside the cabinet in under 2 minutes. The files were organized with the meticulous precision of a man who had spent a long time making sure certain things were findable only by himself, which meant that someone who knew the names and dates in shape of the thing could move through them quickly. Emily knew all of it. The Caldwell file first. 22 years. contracts, correspondence, wire transfers. She photographed every page with both hands, steady ears, tracking footsteps through the house, the timer in her head running. Then the second file, no label on the tab, just a date 14 years ago, the same month her father disappeared, and a single initial. D. She opened it. The first document was a contract. The second, a payment record. The third was a letter handwritten 4 pages dense with a script she didn't recognize, addressed to Nathan Cole. She read the first 2 lines. The lockpicks fell out of her hand, because the letter was in her father's handwriting. Nathan, I'm giving you this chance because I believe you don't fully understand what Caldwell has done in your name. I'm giving you this chance because I think you are better than what you're about to become, her father had written to Nathan Cole. 2 days before he disappeared, he had believed in him enough to give him the chance to do the right thing. He had walked directly toward the most dangerous man in the situation and offered him a way out. And Nathan had kept the letter. For 14 years, locked in a cabinet and kept. She photographed it. Every page. Both sides. Checked the images twice. Put everything back exactly as she found it. Relocked the cabinet. Picked up the lockpicks. Stood up. And stood there for a moment just holding herself together. Her father had tried to save him. Footsteps. Getting closer. She was back at the insurance catalog when Nathan walked in, Marsh 2 steps behind, clipboard in her hands, writing something down. How's it going? Nathan said. Good progress. Maybe another hour. He nodded. His eyes moved through the room, shelves, desk, the locked cabinet along the far wall, with the expression of a man taking inventory of something more significant than furniture. Then he left. Emily waited until the footsteps faded, pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for exactly 3 seconds. Let herself feel the full, impossible weight of what she just read. Her father had tried to save him, and Nathan Cole had let him disappear anyway. She lowered her hand, picked up the clipboard, kept writing. That night, alone with the photographs on her phone and her father's handwriting burning in her memory, Emily finally cried. Not the quiet, controlled kind, the other kind. The kind that had been building for 12 years with nowhere to go. She pressed her face into the pillow and let it come. When it was over, she wiped her face, sat up, and looked at the ceiling with the clear, cold eyes of a woman who has just moved past grief into something more focused. She had the letter. She had the files. She had Marsh's impending statement. And now she had to decide, destroy Nathan Cole publicly the way she had always planned. Or she walk into his study and show him what she'd found and watch him try to explain his way out of his own history. She thought about, I made a mistake, a significant one. She thought about the way he'd said it with that weight, those eyes not performing, remorse carrying it. She thought about her father's letter. I believe you are better than what you're about to become. What do I do with that, Dad? The ceiling had no answer. But Emily Dawson, for the first time in 12 years, was no longer certain she knew what justice was supposed to look like. And that uncertainty, more than the fire, more than the files, more than anything that had happened in 31 days inside these walls, was the most dangerous thing yet. She walked into Nathan's study the next morning with 2 cups of coffee and her father's letter on her phone. The decision had come somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, in that hollow, clarified space that exists after real crying, when everything gets stripped back to the essential questions and the rehearsed answers stop working. She had lain there and asked herself, with as much honesty as she could manage, what do you actually want from this? Not the mission statement she'd recited for 12 years until it became armor. The real answer, the one underneath everything. She wanted to know why. She had enough documentation now to do real permanent damage. The contracts, the payments, the Caldwell correspondence, Marsh's statement, the letter. Carol could take all of it to the right people and detonate Nathan Cole's world within a week. She had always known that moment would come. But her father had written 4 pages to this man 2 days before he disappeared. Not to the police, not to a lawyer, not to anyone who could protect him. He had written to Nathan. He had said, I believe you are better than what you're about to become. And Emily needed to understand with her own eyes in real time what her father had seen in that moment that she was still refusing to see. She walked in with 2 cups of coffee. Nathan was at his desk, jacket off, focused. The particular stillness of a man who has been awake for several hours and has settled into work, avoids settling into his own thoughts. He looked up when she entered, and that involuntary opening happened on his face, the one he couldn't seem to stop, the one that had been making her jaw tighten for days. You didn't have to. I need to talk to you, Emily said, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. He went still, not defensive. She had seen Nathan defensive, and it looked different. This was the stillness of a man who has been bracing for something for a long time and suddenly feels it arrive. She set one cup in front of him, sat down in the chair directly across the desk. Not the wall chair, the equal chair. She put her phone on the desk, face up, turned it so the photograph of her father's letter was visible, and said nothing. He looked at it. The color left his face in a slow, terrible wave. He sat completely still for a long moment, looking at her father's handwriting, and the expression on his face was not what she had spent 12 years preparing herself to see. Not cold calculation, not the smooth deflection of a man caught, not defensive scramble. It was grief, raw, old, still bleeding grief. And Emily, who had been so certain of so many things, felt the certainty shift under her like sand. How long have you known? He asked. His voice was very quiet. Long enough, she said. How long have you known about me? He exhaled slowly. Since the fire. When your name was on the news, I recognized it immediately. He looked at her. I should have told you. Yes, Emily said, you should have. I didn't know how. Try now. He looked at the photograph of the letter, then back at her. Your father came to me because he believed I didn't fully understand what Caldwell was doing, and he said, he was right, I didn't. Not the full extent. He paused. Marcus was the internal auditor on 3 major development projects. He found irregularities, payments routed through Caldwell's accounts that I hadn't authorized and didn't know about. Money that should have gone to the city's Southside Infrastructure Fund. $38 million over 4 years. Emily was still. Go on. He came to me privately first. That letter, he wrote it the day before our meeting. He gave me the chance to come forward voluntarily. To go to the authorities myself, separate my name from Caldwell, do it right. Nathan's voice flattened out. I was going to. I had spoken to my attorney. I had drafted a statement. But, Emily said, Caldwell found out that Marcus had come to me before I could act. Nathan stopped, looked at his hands. I don't know exactly what happened after that. I swear to you, I have never known exactly what happened. What I know is that Marcus disappeared, and Caldwell came to me the next morning and told me the situation had been handled, and that if I pursued any action against him, everything, every payment, every irregularity would be documented as authorized by me. He had fabricated the paper trail. It was complete, convincing. So you let it go, Emily said. I was 32 years old and I was terrified. My father was 41. He had a wife and a 17-year-old daughter, and he still walked into your office with the truth. The silence after that sentence was the loudest thing Emily had ever heard. Nathan didn't try to answer it. He sat with it fully without deflection. And somehow that made it worse. I know, he said. Just that. I know. Where is he? Her voice broke on the last word, the first time, the only time in this entire conversation. She pulled it back immediately. They both heard it. Is he alive? Nathan looked at her, and the pain on his face was so unambiguous that she had her answer before he spoke. I don't know, he said. I genuinely don't know. Caldwell never told me. I told myself Marcus had gone into hiding. Started over. I wanted to believe that. Did you try to find out? A long pause. No, he said, and that is what I will carry for the rest of my life. Emily stood up. She needed to be standing. She turned away from him and faced the wall, hands at her sides, breathing through the enormous thing rising in her chest. Emily, don't. If you say you're sorry, she said, very quiet, very precise, I will walk out of this house and give everything I have to every journalist and prosecutor and federal investigator I can reach. I will make sure your name are the first and last word of every story they tell. Do you understand me? Silence. Yes, he said. She turned back around, face controlled, voice controlled, her eyes doing something she couldn't stop. Here is what's going to happen. You are going to call your attorney and tell him you are prepared to make a full voluntary statement to federal authorities about Robert Caldwell. Everything. Every account, every payment, every conversation, including your own role in what came after. Nathan looked at her. That will end me, he said. Not protest, fact. Yes, it probably will. My company, everything My father built things too, she said. He built a life. He built a family. Someone took all of it apart in a single morning because it was inconvenient. The longest silence yet. Then Nathan Cole reached into his desk drawer, took out his phone and looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been carrying for too long and have finally decided to put down. He dialed. David, he said when it connected, I need you here this afternoon. Something I should have done 14 years ago. Emily left the study. She walked to the kitchen and sat at the table and stayed there for a long time doing nothing. Just sitting. She had not expected any of it. She had expected denial deflection, the smooth management of a man who had spent decades protecting himself. She had expected to deploy every weapon she'd built and fight for every word. She had not expected Nathan Cole to simply break. And she had not expected to feel alongside the grief and the rage and the exhausted vindication the beginning of something that complicated everything. Something that in another version of this story might have been called understanding. She hated that. She noted it, set it aside. Her phone buzzed. Carol. It's happening, Emily said before Carol could speak. He's calling his attorney right now. Carol was quiet for a long beat. Emily. I know. Are you all right? No, she said honestly, but I will be. Did he tell you about your father? He says he doesn't know what happened. I believe him. The silence on Carol's end held about 6 things neither of them said out loud. Okay, Carol said quietly. Okay. The attorney David Wells, 60, precise, the careful manner of a man who had spent 4 decades choosing exactly the right word, arrived at 3. What followed was 3 hours that Emily would remember for the rest of her life. Not in the way dramatic things usually imprint themselves, all clarity and bright edges. In the muted, exhausting way of things that are real. Nathan talked him, the measured, factual precision of a man who had been rehearsing this conversation in his own head for years and was finally delivering it. Weller took notes, asked clarifying the questions occasionally redirected. Emily said very little. She was there as herself fully for the first time since she walked through Nathan Cole's front door. Robert Caldwell, it emerged, had systematically redirected public infrastructure funds through a network of holding companies using the development contracts as vehicles. 38 million was the number Nathan knew. Weller believed the actual number was closer to 90. The Southside Project housing, meant for 12,000 families, had been gutted. The buildings went up. The infrastructure didn't. Those families had been living with the consequences for over a decade. And Marcus Dawson had found it all. He was meticulous, Nathan said at one point, and Emily heard something in his voice she had to sit with for a moment before she could identify it. Pride. He was speaking about her father with pride. Every document cross-referenced, every transfer traced. He had built a case that would have been airtight in any court in the country. Emily looked at the wall. He sounds, Weller said carefully, like a remarkable man. He was, Nathan said. He didn't look at Emily when he said it. He didn't need to. Weller left at 6. The voluntary disclosure changes the calculus significantly, he had said. Penalties, fines, loss of contracts, possible license suspension, but not prison. Probably not prison. Caldwell is the primary actor. You're the witness. And Caldwell, Weller said, is going to have a very difficult few years. After he was gone, Nathan stood at the window. Emily was still in the room in the chair she'd occupied all afternoon, not quite ready to leave. My father believed you were better, she said. I've spent 12 years trying to understand what he saw. Nathan turned. Did you figure it out? He asked. I think he saw the same thing I keep seeing even when I don't want to. She looked at him directly. Someone who could have been different, who should have been. That's not a compliment, Nathan said. No, she agreed. It's not. Is it enough? I don't know yet. Ask me when this is over. He nodded, looked at his hands. I'll find out what happened. And shaman to him, whatever it takes, every thread Caldwell used, I will pull every one of them. I swear that to you. Emily looked at him for a long, searching moment. What she felt she would turn it over for weeks was not forgiveness. She was clear on that. Forgiveness was a long road from here, and she was only at the very beginning of it. but it was something. Some small, stubborn opening in the wall she'd built 12 years ago and reinforced every single day since. I know, she said. She stood. I'm going to call Carol, independent documentation of everything discussed. That's fair. Yes, it is. She walked to the door, stopped. Nathan. He looked up. The night on the phone, you said nobody finds out about Dawson. Not yet. She turned to look at him. What did you mean by not yet? He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw in his face, stripped of every layer, every performance, every carefully managed surface, something that was just afraid. I meant, he said, that I didn't know how to tell you what I'd done, and I was trying to find a way to do it before you found it yourself. You were going to tell me. Yes. When? A long pause. Soon, he said. I was going to tell you soon. Emily stood there, looked at him, turned and walked out. In the hallway she stopped, leaned against the wall and pressed her hand flat over her heart, felt it hard, unsteady, real. Because here was the thing she couldn't shake, the thing that had been sitting underneath all of it. Since Nathan picked up that phone, without hesitation, her father had been right. Nathan Cole was better than what he had become. There had always been something better in there, locked under 14 years of guilt and compromise and a fear he'd been too young to override when it mattered. Marcus Dawson had seen it before anyone else. What do I do with that, Dad? She could hear Nathan moving in the study. Papers. The quiet sound of a man beginning at last to dismantle the fortress he'd built around the worst thing he had ever done. Emily pushed off the wall and walked down the hallway. 3 weeks until the federal process began. 3 weeks to hold herself and this complicated, unstable, necessary thing together. While the truth her father had died protecting finally moved toward the light, she was going to be there for every step of it. She owed him that. She owed herself that. And somewhere in a part of her that had been silent for a very long time, she believed that Marcus Dawson, meticulous, principled, fiercely loving, already knew. The 3 weeks moved the way all impossible things moved, both too fast and too slow depending on which moment Emily was living through. The sessions with Weller were slow, methodical, exhausting in the particular way truth-telling is exhausting when it has to be organized into something a federal prosecutor can work with. Nathan sat through them with a patience and steadiness that surprised her. She had expected dismantling a lie to look more violent, more immediately satisfying. It didn't look like that. It looked like paperwork. Nathan's voice flat and factual. Walking a federal investigator named Sorensen through a 14-year timeline in a room that smelled like carpet cleaner and bad coffee. The nights were different. The nights moved fast and strange because the nights were when the thing she was trying not to think about surfaced with the quiet insistence of something that refused to stay submerged. She was still in the house. She had reasons documented, defensible, strategic reasons. She needed to be present through the process. She was there as documentation witness, the daughter of the man at the center of everything. All of that was true. What was also true, what she kept finding at the bottom of herself when she wasn't looking somewhere else, was that she wasn't ready to leave yet. And she wasn't entirely certain what that meant. On the 14th night, she was at the kitchen table at 11:30 when Nathan walked in. He'd been with Weller until 10. She'd assumed he'd gone to bed. He stopped when he saw her. Then he went to the cabinet, took out 2 glasses and held one up in a silent question. She nodded. He poured 2 bourbons and sat down across from her. Not at the head of the table, across from her. They sat in silence. Sorensen called me after you left the room today, Nathan said. You gave a supplemental statement. I did. The photographs from the cabinet. Yes. You could have used those to end me. He said it without accusation, a fact turned over carefully. Months ago, before any of this. I know. Why didn't you? Oh, she was quiet for a moment. Because my father didn't go to the authorities either. Not first, he came to you. She looked at him. I was trying to understand why he made that choice. The only way to understand it was to make it myself. Nathan was very still. And do you, he said, understand it? I think he believes some people deserve the chance to be the version of themselves they were supposed to be, Emily said slowly, before the world gets to them. I don't know if he was right, but I understand why he believed it. Nathan looked at his glass for a long moment. I found something, he said. Emily's breath stopped. Caldwell used 2 fixers for the operational side of what he did. One was arrested in 2019 on an unrelated charge and made a deal. Part of that deal included a sealed deposition. Nathan looked at her directly. My attorneys accessed it today. It's about your father. The kitchen is absolutely quiet. Tell me, she said. Marcus left the country 3 days after he disappeared, a passport scan. Costa Rica. Nathan's voice was careful, deliberate, carrying every ounce of what he was about to say. Caldwell's people didn't hurt him. They went to the house. They made it very clear what would happen if he ever surfaced the documents. To him, to your mother, to you, he paused. He left to protect you. The ground shifted under everything. Her father hadn't been killed, hadn't vanished into something violent and final and irreversible. He had stood in a room with men who threatened the people he loved most, and he had chosen deliberately at enormous personal cost to disappear so that the threat would disappear with him. He had broken their hearts to save them. Costa Rica, she said, her voice was barely fair. The deposition is from 2019. That's the last confirmed information we have. Nathan leaned forward slightly. But Emily, he was alive in 2019. He was alive. She pressed both hands over her mouth, sat like that for 20 seconds, feeling the full rearranging impact of those words moving through her like a wave through something that has been standing rigid against water for 12 years. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were wet. Her voice, when it came, was the steadiest it had been all evening. I need Carol, she said, and the name of whoever Sorensen uses for international tracing. Already asked, Nathan said. Weller has the contact. He's expecting your call first thing tomorrow. Emily looked at him. This man across the kitchen table with bourbon, he wasn't drinking, and eyes watching her was something she still didn't have a clean name for. You found this today, she said. You waited until tonight. I wanted to be certain it was real before I gave it to you, he said. I didn't want to hand you something and then have to take it back. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the counter, gripped the edge with both hands and stood there with her back to him. Just breathing. Just letting herself feel the thing she hadn't allowed in 12 years. The specific, tentative, terrifying sensation called hope. The call with the international patricier took 4 days to arrange and 40 minutes to deliver what 12 years of her life had been building toward. Marcus Dawson was alive, 63 years old, living outside San Jose for 11 years under a modified name. Working as a bookkeeper, the irony so sharp it made Emily laugh out loud in a way that startled Carol, who was sitting beside her. He had a phone number. Carol wrote it on a piece of paper and pushed it across the table. Emily looked at it for a long time. Do you want me to leave? Carol asked. No, stay. She picked up her phone, dialed, 4 rings, 5. And then a voice she hadn't heard in 12 years older, deeper, rougher at the edges, but entirely and unmistakably her father's said, Hello. Emily opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Hello. More careful now. Alert. Dad? A silence that lasted 3 seconds and felt like an entire lifetime. Then Emily. Just her name. Barely above a whisper. The way someone says a word they've been afraid to say out loud in case saying it makes the absence more real. Carol was crying. Emily couldn't look at her. It's me, Emily said. Her voice was steady. She was going to be her father's daughter. I found you. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Carol went to another room after 20 minutes. Emily sat at the table through all of it, her father's apologies pouring out in the first 10 minutes, the guilt of a man who had been living with an impossible choice for 12 years, and she let him say everything. All of it. Every word. She didn't redirect or manage or reassure. She let him carry it across the phone line and received it the way it deserved to be received. Then when he was done, she told him what she had done. The agency, the mansion, the fire, Nathan Cole, the files, the federal process. She talked for 40 minutes and he listened without interrupting, and she could hear him breathing steady, careful, fully present, and something inside her realigned with every sentence. A fracture slowly, incrementally knitting itself back. You came after the truth, he said when she finished. Not surprised, just recognizing her. I had a good teacher, she said. A pause. Your mother, she's been gone 3 years, Dad. She said it gently. She never stopped believing you were out there. The silence on his end was the most painful sound she'd ever heard. I'm coming home, he said. I know, she said. I know you are. Robert Caldwell was indicted on 11 counts of federal fraud, 2 counts of witness intimidation, and 1 count of conspiracy related to Marcus Dawson's forced disappearance, 4 weeks after Nathan Cole's voluntary disclosure set the federal process in motion. Carol broke the story. She had been holding it, waiting for the arc to be complete. Not just the crime, but the full shape of it. The cover-up. The daughter who spent 12 years hunting the truth. The man who finally did what he should have done in the first place. The piece ran on a Thursday, and by noon it had been picked up by every major outlet in the country. Emily read it at the kitchen table with her second coffee. She felt strange. Not the triumphant rush she had imagined for years. Not the clean, bright satisfaction of a battle won. Something quieter and more complicated. The feeling of a chapter closing that had shaped her entire adult life, and the uncertain necessary vertigo of not knowing yet what came next. Nathan came in while she was reading. He could tell from her face that she'd seen it. He poured coffee and sat down, and they read together in silence, which was something they'd been doing without either of them deciding to. "How are you feeling?" he said after a while. "Like I don't know what to do with myself," she said honestly. "I've been pointed at this for so long." "Strange," he offered. "Very." He nodded, drank his coffee. "I'm resigning the Southside contracts," he said. "All of them. And the funds, whatever comes back through the civil process, I'm putting back into the infrastructure fund. Independent oversight. No exceptions. That's going to cost you significantly." "Yes. Your board can respond however they choose," he said. "This is not a business decision." She was quiet for a moment. "The foundation. Weller mentioned it." He looked up. "I wanted to ask you first," Nathan said. "It's not my name to use. It's yours and his." He held her gaze. "An accountability foundation. Funding independent audits of public infrastructure contracts. Protecting the people who do what your father did. Whistleblowers. People who tell the truth at personal cost." Emily sat with that. "He's coming home," she said. "My father. 2 weeks." Something moved across Nathan's face. "I know. I want him to be part of deciding what it looks like." "Of course, absolutely." Then quietly, "I'd like to meet him, if he's willing." "I think," Emily said carefully, "that might be the most complicated question you have asked me yet." "I know. I'll ask him," she said. "That's all I can promise." "That's enough," Nathan said. Marcus Dawson landed on a Tuesday afternoon. Emily was at the gate 20 minutes early, turning her phone over in her hands, not looking at anything in particular. Carol had offered to come. She'd said no. This moment belonged only to them. She saw him before he saw her, thinner than she remembered. Silver hair, all of it. Lines in his face that hadn't been there when she was 17. Dark jacket, one bag, the slightly deliberate walk of a man who had spent a long time being careful about where he went. Then he looked up. He stopped. She didn't remember crossing the distance. One moment she was standing there, and the next her father's arms were around her, and her face was pressed against his shoulder, and 12 years of absence collapsed into a single wordless, irreversible moment that no amount of language could carry. She felt him shaking. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I'm so sorry, Emily." "You're here," she said. "You're here now." "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." They stood like that for a long time. The gate emptied around them. None of it mattered. It took Marcus Dawson 2 weeks to fully understand what his daughter had done. He read everything. The files, the timeline, the legal documents, Carol's article, the federal indictment. He sat with all of it methodically, the way he had always processed difficult things. And when he was finished, he sat across from Emily at the kitchen table of the apartment she'd rented. She had moved out of Nathan's house the day she heard her father's voice. She'd known in that moment that chapter was complete, and looked at her for a long moment. "You did all of this," he said, "by yourself." Carol helped. "Emily." "You taught me," she said simply. He shook his head slowly. "I taught you bookkeeping and how to read a balance sheet." "You taught me that the truth is worth the key," she said. "You demonstrated it, hard to miss." He was quiet. "Nathan Cole." She met his eyes. "What about him, Boadies?" "You saved his life, knowing who he was." "Yes." Marcus turned his coffee cup in his hands. "He reached out, through Weller. He asked if I'd be willing to speak with him." Emily watched her father's face carefully. "And I said yes. She held still. Emily. Her father looked at her directly. I wrote him that letter 14 years ago because I believed he had the capacity to do the right thing. I didn't know then whether I was correct. He paused. I'd like to find out if I was. It won't fix what he did, Emily said. What he failed to do. No, Marcus agreed, it won't. He looked at his daughter with the full, clear-eyed love of a man who had spent 12 years carrying her face. But your mother used to say that the only thing worse than an irreversible wrong is refusing to let anything grow in its place. Emily felt her throat tighten. She was wiser than both of us, Marcus said softly. Yes, Emily said. She was. The foundation, Emily said finally. Nathan wants to call it the Dawson Accountability Fund. Her father considered it. What do you want to call it? He asked. She thought for a moment. Just Dawson, simple. Marcus nodded slowly. Simple is right. 3 months later, the Dawson Fund held its first board meeting. Emily sat at the head of the table. Her father sat to her right. Carol 2 seats down with a legal pad and the focused expression she wore when something was finally, after enormous effort, going right. Nathan Cole was not on the board. He had offered funding oversight, whatever role was useful. Emily had told him clearly and without softness that his role was to testify to pay and to stay out of the governance of something that bore her father's name. He had said, that's fair. She had said, oh, I know. He was, however, the primary funder. $62 million in recouped Caldwell assets structured through 6 weeks of Weller's work into something independent and irrevocable, entirely outside Nathan's control. He had signed the transfer documents without hesitation. She had watched him sign. She still didn't have a clean name for what she felt about Nathan Cole. It wasn't forgiveness she was honest with herself about that stopped feeling guilty about the uncertainty. Forgiveness was a door she might never fully open, and that was her right. But it wasn't hatred either. Hadn't been for a long time. It was something with more texture than either word. Something that acknowledged without excusing the full, complicated truth of a person who had done a terrible thing and was spending the rest of his life trying to build something in its place. Her father would have a word for it. He had always been better with words. She would ask him. She had time now. That was the thing she kept returning to, the specific, unexpected gift at the end of all of it. She had time. Her father was here. The truth was in the light. The people who needed to face consequences were facing them. And Emily Dawson, who had spent 12 years moving through the world with one fixed purpose and no room for anything else, was finally, carefully, tentatively, with all the caution of someone learning to walk on ground they'd long believed was unsafe, beginning to discover what she wanted her life to look like now. The board meeting ended at 4. Her father walked out with her into the afternoon, and they stood there side by side, and he put his hand over hers without saying anything. She squeezed it once. You know what I keep thinking about it, he said. What? That you went back into a burning building. He shook his head slowly. For a man you had every reason to walk away from. I know. That's not strategy, he said. That's character. Emily looked at him. You always said integrity isn't what you do when it's easy. I did say that. You were right. He smiled, a real one, the one she remembered from childhood, the one she had been afraid she would never see again. I'm not always right. No, she agreed, but you were right about that. Some stories end not with a single resounding moment, not with the clean satisfaction of a wound finally closed, but with something steadier and harder. One, a father and daughter, standing in afternoon light, the truth where it belongs. A foundation bearing a name the world would come to associate not with loss, but with protection. Not with silence, but with the courage of people who refused to be quiet when it mattered. Marcus Dawson had once told a powerful man that he believed he was better than what he was about to become. He had paid an enormous price for that belief, and his daughter had walked through fire to prove that he was right. That was the story, every word of it, and it was enough.